All right. So, welcome to our notebook class. We're glad to have you here. Just one more time, we'll answer questions in the Slido after the presentation, but you're welcome to ask them at any time. All right.
So, hi everybody, we're Team 7182 Mechanical Paradox. We're a 4-H team based out of Howard County, Maryland. We're entering our 8th year in robotics this coming season, and we've won Think Award at every level of the competition, including the World Championships. My name is Celine, and this is my first year on the team.
I'm Cece. This is my 2nd year on the team.
And I'm Siobhan. This is my 5th year on the team.
All right. So, we're going to start the class by covering a basic introduction to the notebook and what it is, and then we'll cover different options you have for your notebook and just the basic logistical things on how to make your notebook and how to make it as strong as it can be, and then we will go into tips and tricks to help make your notebook the best it can be.
You skipped a slide.
Did I?
Yeah.
Sorry. There we go.
There. So what exactly is a notebook? A notebook is the written documentation of a team's entire journey throughout the entire season, from kickoff or off-season to their very last competition. So the notebook includes the written documentation of every meeting, every outreach event, and everything that goes on in meetings or for your team. It can include the reflections of outreach events or meetings, testing of mechanisms or code, plans for the future even, and really anything that goes on.
So, why is the notebook important? If you see on the right side of the screen, you're going to see the order of progression, and you'll see that a lot of the ways to advance are going to require the notebook for you to advance. So obviously the notebook helps with advancement and awards. It's also just going to help prep you for a career in the future in a STEM field or any other fields, because it is going to prepare you for critical writing skills, critical thinking skills, how to document your plans, how to document your improvements, your successes, and your failures, which are going to be important because when you have a job, you're going to want to see where you went wrong and how to improve on things.
So there are several different options that you have when doing the notebook. One of them is you could choose to make a single notebook, or you have 2 notebooks. So when you submit to the judges, you'd have like 2 separate notebooks, but they'd both cover your team and such. There are different benefits and negative aspects to both. If you have one notebook, you keep all of your information consolidated into a single space, which makes it easier to look at, and it's easier to organize that, and you don't have to fill as much space. So as you're going, if you're finding yourself struggling to find out what to say and what to write, then you might want to do one notebook because you'll have less information, you'll have less space that you're required to fill. Alternatively, you have the issue that all of your writing is going to be put together. So if you have a lot to say, then you have to try and cram it all into one notebook, which then might make things less neat and such. Additionally, you have less options. So the fact that you can divide stuff can be super helpful sometimes. So if you want more options for how you divide things and how you keep things organized and separated, 2 notebooks might be the better option for you. With 2 notebooks, you do have more room. You could choose several different ways to divide the information, whether you want to do like a separate outreach section and meeting logs, or just something else. And you then do have more space to fill, which could be a pro or a con, depending on how much you have to say.
And there are more options for your notebooks. For example, you can have an electronic notebook or you can have a traditional or written notebook. So an electronic notebook is really good for if you want several people to access it at one time, so you can have several people working on it at once. Whereas a traditional, you can only really have one person working at it at a time. For electronic, you can fix certain spelling mistakes or whatnot, and you can also change around your formatting if that's what you want to do. You can also put in pictures way easier than you can with a handwritten. So, for example, you can just insert a photo into the electronic notebook and you can just print it out the entire page. And whereas a traditional, you'd have to print out a photo and then stick it in with tape or something. Though electronic does seem good, it also has some cons. For example, it doesn't show as much personality as a traditional one, and it is harder to insert hand-drawn sketches, and sketches are very important, especially hand-drawn ones, to show exactly what is going on for each mechanism or whatnot. So for traditional, you can hand draw sketches right into that notebook. It's super easy, and once again, sketches are very important, so this is a very useful tip for them. And traditional also shows more personality than electronic, so you can tell kind of handwriting from different from each other. And it does take more time and more effort, but it definitely is worth it, knowing that you wrote out an entire page handwritten. But you can also not fix past errors. If you have a spelling mistake, you have to cross it out with one line and then correct it if you even can, just right above it. And it does take more time and more effort, but that can be a con and a pro, because more time and more effort means that you are taking more time into showing that you really want to have a good notebook. And it shows that you are really thinking about what you want to do in your notebook, whereas it also does obviously take more time. So if you don't want to put in that much time into your notebook, then maybe an electronic one is more for you.
So now we're going to get into the things that you should be putting into your notebook or notebooks. One of the main things that goes into a notebook are the meeting logs, which is where you document exactly what happens at every single meeting, because it's going to show a progression of how your team has grown, how your design has grown, how your robot has changed throughout the season. So every meeting log should start with attendance, your goals, and your agenda for that meeting. And then at the end of the meeting, you kind of want to go through which of your tasks that you actually completed and reflections on maybe how it worked, how it didn't work. So for example, one of the tasks might have been to finish your autonomous program. And you make calculations for your autonomous, but you haven't quite figured out why the robot isn't working. So then you put in what you might need to do for the next meeting, which in this case would be identify the error and fix it by doing whatever the error was that you need to fix. Meeting logs should be done by every member who has done something. They should not just be written by one person the entire season. If you worked on something during your meeting, you should be writing about what you were working on. This just shows a variety in handwriting or typing or whatever, so that the judges can see that every single person is working on the notebook.
So one of the most important sections of your notebook is the outreach section. This basically covers anything that your team is doing that isn't on the robot. It's kind of that is reaching out in the community. And there are three main forms of outreach. Outreach within the local or just general STEM community. This would include any learning you're doing about STEM, and any time you're promoting your own love of STEM. So whether it be a tour of a STEM company or just a discussion with STEM professionals, maybe you go somewhere and you show your robot to professionals in the industry and receive feedback on that, so they can help you improve your design, and maybe you can take some learning from the STEM community and STEM fields, and then apply that to your robot. Outreach within the FIRST community is anything that you're doing within other individuals in FIRST, as the name might imply. It's if you're mentoring another team, whether it's like an FLL team or you're helping mentor maybe another FTC team or another first team in general, you should document that and keep track of it. And you also might volunteer at events or like attend a class or teach a class. And that also would be something you would want to document to show that you're still learning and you're helping others to learn. And then there's outreach within the general community. This is any time that you are promoting FIRST or STEM. If you are trying to get people actively engaged in the STEM community and showing them why they might be interested in the STEM fields, then that it counts as outreach within the general community. Or if you're promoting FIRST and like maybe starting another team, or you're helping people who are interested in starting teams learn about how to, or just getting FIRST's name out there so that more people know what FIRST is and what we do, and like what we as FTC teams and as other robotics teams do in FIRST. Don't forget that you should be documenting everything with photos, and more photos. Just anytime you're at these events, you want to prove that you are actually doing what you said you were, and the best way to do that is through photos, because that shows that you are there and you are engaging and you're immersing yourself in those communities.
So another important thing about your notebook is that you can tab pages. You're only allowed to tab up to 8 pages, so you really want to focus on really the important things and have a very diverse page, or a very diverse pages that are tabbed. So like you might want to focus on important design changes or decisions, different stages of development. Definitely do as many topics as you can, such as, something mechanical, something code related, something CAD relating, something about testing, a math page. Math is very important to tab. Highly advised to tab at least one page with a lot of math on it. ECCC is smiling. These pages should have a lot of crucial information, and they should definitely include a lot of photos, because photos are also very important. However, you can tab these pages, but tabbing a page does not guarantee a judge will look at it. So you want to have every single page in your notebook be just as good as the other. You just want to tab the pages that are really important.
So the one-page summary. This is a page that tends to go in the front of your notebook, which is literally kind of what the name says. It's a one-page summary of your entire notebook as a whole. So it's going to go over things like your team overview, maybe a short, like who your team is organized with, so whether it's your school or your 4-H, maybe your seasonal goals, a short introduction to your robot, and then obviously it's also going to include the pages that you are tabbing, because it's the first thing that the judges are going to be looking at, so it's the best place to tell them exactly what you want them to look at as well. Keep it brief. You really should keep it just to one page, preferably a one-sided page, not two-sided. You don't want it to be super wordy, because you want them to actually read it and not skim it.
Okay, so one of the most important things, I like talking about important things, but is the organization in your notebook. Document everything you do, whether it's a meeting, an outreach event, a competition, a tour, just anything you are doing that is related to robotics should be getting written down in the notebook. This notebook is a documentation of your team's journey, and you should be documenting everything that happens in your journey, whether it's a failure, a success, just something small that you did that helped you to grow as a team, or your knowledge to grow, or you're helping others. So anything that you do that is robotics related, if you are asking the question, should I write this in the notebook? The answer is yes. And when you're writing in the notebook, you want to, once you're getting started, pick a format that you're going to follow throughout the notebook and stick with it. So if you're doing like a handwritten notebook, figure out how you're going to set up each page so that they follow a generally similar format, because you don't want to be having a hodgepodge of different styles put together into the notebook, because that does look a bit more sloppy. Also, to go alongside that, you do want to write in one color for the most part. If you're doing handwritten, then one color. We usually recommend black. It used to be a requirement that it's black. I don't think it is anymore. If you are typing or printing out pages, color is fine. If you have like photos, that they should be colorful. And if you have like different fonts or if you have different colors inside your typed pages, then that's fine. Just make sure there's always a reason that you're using a different color. Don't just say, oh, it looks pretty. Like try and add variety in that color. All right. Nathan's going to answer this next one now that he can speak.
Okay. Sorry about that earlier. Some tips and tricks in writing a notebook is to make sure you write down everything that happens. If you're thinking about designing a part but you decide not to, write that down. If you're working on designing a part but it's not finalized or anything, make sure you write that down. You should also make sure that your notebook doesn't get thicker than 3 inches. For written notebooks, this isn't a problem, but if you're doing electronic notebooks, make sure not to buy a binder that's larger than 3 inches. Remember, if you have a lot to say, you can always have 2 notebooks. Something you should do is include a lot of photos. Photos are really great. They allow the judges to see exactly everything that you're doing. Another thing you should do is have lots of math. Math makes it look like you're doing a lot of thinking, and it's also very nice for judges to show judges the physics and everything that's going on through robotics. You should also show the dates and times for meetings in the meeting log so that the judges know when you're meeting. You should photos. You should also show that when you test and document decisions. So whenever you test something, write down what happens to that test. Make sure it's scientific. You should also include your signatures. For something that we do is we write once we're done with the written notebook section, we sign it, and then we have someone read through it and sign it. So we know it was written when we know someone reviewed it. Again, more photos, they're amazing. And in addition to photos, you also have hand-drawn and or electronic sketches. These are just a great way to show the process of designing stuff, because you can't quite take a photo of your mind unless you sketch it.
And actually, so I will actually share my screen now. So if CC, so unfortunately, I don't have my tablet right now, so my sketches might be a little bit floppy, but I will demonstrate to you guys what a sketch is, kind of what they want to see. So right now I have just a very basic sketch. You see it's kind of sloppy, but right now you can kind of tell what this is. This is an intake. This is a stone. You can't really tell too much. So right now it looks really sloppy, and the thing is, you really want to actually have arrows, not just to show what kind of motion is happening. So right now you can kind of tell that the wheels are now moving and the stone is going up. But another thing is that you still can't really tell what exactly anything is going on. So you actually want to have words as well. So like wheel, an arrow pointing to the wheel, and there's a stone, and then you at the top or wherever you are demonstrating it, you want to have the top view, and you want to have the name of whatever mechanism you have on there. So this is a very basic sketch. It took me like 2 minutes to do during the call even, because I came not very prepared today apparently. But so it really doesn't take too long to just sketch something up really quick. And most of the time you want to do handwritten sketches, although you can do electronic sketches like this and print them out. But hand-drawn sketches really does show that, you know, you're doing it by yourself. You're not having any other support, and you know what you're doing. So this is all nice and all, but there's something very important that you can't tell what's going on in this photo, is that this intake is actually not just straight, it's actually at an angle. And that's why whenever you provide one sketch, you want to have another view of the same thing, like at a side view. And once again, this doesn't have very much on it, but you can kind of tell what's going on. So for example, this is actually at a 20-degree angle, and I'm sorry for my shape as well, I just drew it with a mouse. But you can now kind of see what's going on exactly when you combine both of this sketch and this sketch. So having two different sketches of the perspective is very important to tell what exactly is going on. Again, you want to have the descriptions, and I'm sorry I didn't actually label the stone or things like that. I had very limited time to do this, but you still want to label everything to make sure everyone who reads your notebook knows what's going on exactly. This is very important, and again, I only did this in a couple minutes. You don't have to spend like an entire day trying to figure out what to write down. You can sketch it off on a separate piece of paper if you have a traditional notebook, and then once you're done with the separate piece of paper, you can put it in the notebook as long as it's in pen, or you can redraw it again, which is what I often do because it kind of shows what I exactly want for the sketch to look like, and it does help a lot for things like that. And just remember to, actually I forgot to write down something, but you still want to have, the side view, like say for here, or you want to have like side view of the intake, or right here you want to do side view of the intake or whatever. As long as you can tell what's going on, the sketches are very important, and you definitely want to have lots of sketches in your notebook. Sketches are extremely important for many things, just sketches. And another thing that I forgot to include in these sketches is that you actually do kind of want dimensions in these sketches. So like right here, you would probably do something like, if I pick another color so you can see it, this right here, this right here, this wheel to this wheel is 3.2 inches away from each other. And you also want to write down the units, of course, inches. And then, for example, like also the middle to middle and things like that. That's super important to tell exactly what exactly is going on. Like you can't otherwise, without this layer, you can't tell how close they are together. And sometimes your drawing isn't picture perfect. So for example, this is 4 inches across from this side to this, so this is 4 inches. You can't really tell that this is supposed to be 3.2 or whatever inches apart at all because it looks the same. So if you add dimensions to your even just a little bit thrown together sketch, it makes it a lot clearer of what's going on. And also another thing is that when you're sketching, it doesn't have to be perfect. You can still tell what's going on from this sketch I drew in a minute, even though it's a little bit rough and the edges don't line up. This is there's a lot of like unclosed circles and things like that, but you can still tell what's going on. So even someone who doesn't classify themselves as an artist can still do a sketch that's perfectly fine. Nothing has to be a perfect circle. You don't have to have a perfect rectangle. You can just throw stuff together, and as long as you label everything and you make sure everything is at least slightly clear to whoever's reading it, then you are able to create a good sketch. And now I will stop recording my screen and can continue on.
Yeah, and just to add, if you are working on oh, there we go. If you're doing a concept sketch, even with that dimensions, try and just add rough predictions of what those dimensions will be so that they know if whatever you're drawing is going to be like the full size of the robot or a smaller aspect. Okay.
Oh, this is
So to continue tips and tricks, everyone should try and divide it evenly, so that you get a wide variety of people writing. It does help to make sure everyone is actively engaged and is aware of what's going on in the robot, and it provides a lot of variety in the writing, so you get to see different writing styles and different people basically telling the story of the robot and of your team, which kind of just shows that you are a cohesive team and such. try and put time and thought into the entries. You might want to draft your entry before you write it, because especially if you are handwriting it, you want to make sure that you're not going to make a ton of spelling errors or other errors as you're writing it, because you can't go back and erase that and rewrite it. So take time and put some effort into it. You don't have to spend like 5 hours on a single page in the notebook, but you should be putting in enough time to show that you actually thought about what you were writing and such. Also, you might want to you definitely want to provide an overview of the team and the robot in your notebook. The team is supposed to cover everything in your journey throughout that year, from who you are as a team and what each individual on the team, who they are, and to your robot and what you built and what you presented and how you did at competitions and such. So do make sure to cover all of that in the notebook. And don't forget about the photos. They are super important. If you think about it, as judges are going through, when you're reading like a newspaper, would you want to see a newspaper that has all writing and no pictures at all? Personally, I don't find that very appealing. And so when you're looking at it, you want to see those photos because they do provide you with a bit of a break from all of the text and kind of provide the opportunity to see more.
So that was the end of our presentation. Thank you all so much for listening. And we also will be answering more questions from Slido. And if you want to start asking more, then please do go to the link that is in the chat that I will send once again. So click that and ask us some questions. We'll answer some. And yeah, thank you all so much once again.
All right.
Yeah, sorry.
Celine, would you like to take the first question?
I'm actually going to take the second one, but the question is, does the notebook carry from one season to the next, or do you restart a notebook each season? So since the notebook is a documentation of your robot's journey throughout the season, you can't exactly reuse it because you're not going to be using the same robot the next season. You have to start your robot all over again, which means you kind of have to start your notebook all over again as well. And since the outreach that you're doing for one season does not count for your outreach that you'll be doing for the next season, you can't really reuse that part of your notebook either. So the answer to that question would be no.
It is on the FTC forum that the season ends once your last competition is, just with all of the virus stuff that shut down all of the competitions. It's the last time you attended a competition and competed in it. So that's when you start documenting.
Okay, I'll answer the third one. For an online notebook, what type of organized medium do you use? We use Google Drive for everything in a shared drive. However, I'm pretty sure Microsoft Word and whatever they do with OneDrive would work as well.
And I'll actually answer the first question. So the question is, how expensive on average is the engineering notebook? So again, it also depends on what type of notebook you're going to use. For example, an electronic notebook, you have to do everything online and then print them out and put them in a 3-ring binder. So the 3-ring binders you can probably find at like Staples or anything. I don't really know the exact pricing, but I'd say probably like $10, $20-ish. Traditional, there's actually, where we get our notebooks is from Book Factory, which the notebooks, the prices vary a little bit. So depending on how thick or detailed you want the lines to be or whatever, it can go from like $10 to probably $30. So really not too expensive. It just matters on like what kind of notebook you really want. And I will put bookfactory.com.
Okay,
If you go to that, if you look up Book Factory, then you are able to just kind of find the type of notebook that you want and ship it, and it's really cheap and simple.
For the next question, what are some examples of mathematic equations you could include in the notebook? Some great examples of this are torque calculations or stress analysis. to figure out if your why a part broke. Like one of the problems we had was that it one of our 3D printed parts would get twisted and it snapped. So we did a torsion calculation to figure out how much force was being applied on it, and if that force was enough to break the plastic, so we could figure out if there's something else wrong with the robot. Also, the torque calculations, which CC did these will allow you to determine what type of motor you need. Because if you want your robot to be really, really fast, you can't just put the highest RPM motor because it might not have enough torque to actually accelerate quickly enough. So you might want to take that down to a smaller motor. But you can figure that out through torque calculations.
Okay. I'm going to just pull up the questions so we can all see them on here. You should be able to see them now.
And can you like the ones that we already answered?
I think they're getting resolved.
Oh, they're resolving?
Yeah, I believe so.
I didn't know you could do that. Okay.
Yeah. So how many people should work on finalizing the notebook? Really, you should try and get as many people on the team as possible to work in any aspect of the notebook. So if you have people going back and reviewing things, it might be good if, as someone goes in to write their page, they look at the page before and say, okay, well, I think that maybe you might want to switch that photo with something else, or just make sure that everyone's aware of what's going on. The notebook can be used not only for judges, but also to help you guys keep up to date. So if you have different roles on your team, and maybe you have people working on hardware and separate people working on software, this might be a way for them to interact and stay on top of everything that's going on, because you do want to be aware of as much as you can with the team. So the notebook can be used to help with that. So yeah, as many people as you can have working on the notebook should be working on the notebook. Definitely don't limit it to 1 or 2 people. For the final check through, you might want one person to go through the entire thing and make sure everything's looking good, and you didn't accidentally, maybe if you're doing a written one, skip a page, and if so, figure out how to deal with that. Or if you have like a printed notebook that is electronic, then you might want to have one person make sure all of the pages are printed and such. But in general, just try and get as many people to work on it as possible. You should have as many sets of eyes on it as possible, because that always increases accuracy.
One of these other questions is, do you have an email that you can contact us for? And yes, our email is mechanicalparadox7182@gmail.com, which I will put in the chat. And another question is, when should the notebooks be done or finished before the competition? And once again, you want to document every single meeting. So if you have a meeting right before the competition, you should definitely document that. But obviously, if you're still working on it, like the day of the competition, you kind of don't want to do that. So definitely just try to finish it up as quickly as possible with including as much as you can.
So one of the questions here is, if you're doing an electronic notebook, should you label who wrote each part of the entries or have everyone's name in one place? So I would suggest that you actually do label who wrote each part of the entries, primarily because when you take ownership of your work, you're then going to put more effort into it, versus if it's anonymous, then you might not feel so bad if you're like, oh, well, today I don't feel like doing that much, so I'll just like write a bullet point and then put in a picture. So I would definitely suggest putting in your signature or somebody's name besides each part of the notebook for whoever wrote it. But you should also have the attendance part at the beginning or at the top of your meeting logs, and that's where everyone's name will
go. The next question is, if you're doing 2 notebooks, how would you split the categories? So something we did was we had one notebook for meeting logs that was entirely dedicated to meeting logs, and another notebook dedicated to the design, the CAD, the code, and various other categories. And that was our electronic notebook. That answer your question?
Okay, so Next up is how to deal with some teams who do not work on the robot. I'm going to guess that you're referring to specific members. So if you have a certain member that has no desire to work on the notebook or do code or anything, first of all, I would encourage that they do try and get involved in some of that, because it is good to be aware of everything that's going on. However, if you have people who want to only write in the notebook, then they can maybe take a leading role in the notebook. They shouldn't necessarily be the only one writing the notebook, but might be the one who's in charge of making sure that other people write their pages in the notebook, and helps to detail, like, this is the format that we use, and helps to make sure that everyone is aware of that format and uses it, and then helps to assign people to do certain pages. And kind of just takes that sort of leadership role where they're trying to make sure that the entire team is getting the notebook done and following the format, and keeps the notebook organized. And so that might eliminate the problem of having one team member who only does the notebook, and you still can let them focus on the notebook, but you also have other people working on the notebook as well.
So, another question is, what categories are there on average? So this really depends. A lot of teams have many different types of categories, but a lot of teams have similar categories. Some have different, some have a lot, some have very few. For us, we have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I mean, like, we have like 10 roughly for one of our seasons. And we actually have a lot of subcategories. So, for example, in like presentations, we have like 2 subcategories, and like for auto, we have, tele-up code and autonomous code and things like that. So we have very many. It just depends on what you kind of prefer. If you want to have like maybe one design section, one code section, one team section, one outreach section, one CAD section, that's okay. If you want to have like 5 more, that's also okay. If you want to have, I don't know, a lot, then that's okay as well. It really depends on what you really want, as long as you get across everything that's really important for your notebook. And another one that you guys might not be able to answer is, how many pages on average do you have? And I actually have a couple notebooks here right now, so I can actually see how many pages we have for a couple of them. So I'd say like probably around like 100 to 200 pages for a handwritten notebook. And for electronic, it's kind of hard to tell sometimes if you don't label the certain pages, but I'd say around the same as well, probably 300 even sometimes. It really depends on how much you want to write for each page, or how many pages you actually want, or how many sections you want to have, or if you're having a traditional or electronic notebook. It really depends on that as well. So, yeah.
All right, Celine, I think you're up.
So one of the questions is, what does your average meeting entry look like? So since everyone is supposed to be doing something at the meeting, and a meeting log is supposed to include what you're doing at the meeting, it can be anywhere from 1 page to multiple pages. So you're going to include your attendance at the top of the page. Every person should sign just to say like, hey, yes, I was here today at this meeting. And then we start off with our tasks or our agenda for the day. So maybe we want to work on finishing up the drivetrain, and Nathan is going to be working on CADing something, and CC is going to be starting off on the vision code. So that's our agenda for the day. And then at the end of the day, everyone is going to write in what they actually accomplished and how they did it. So maybe CC takes up a page, and Nathan takes up half a page, and the drivetrain takes up 2 pages because, Siobhan likes to draw pictures or whatever. And then you're going to sign every page that you wrote, and someone will review it and be like, yeah, this looks good, and then they sign those pages too.
So another question is, do you include social media in your notebook? Yes, we have a separate outreach section. And if you do a lot of outreach over social media, such as mentoring teams or communicating with other teams or planning events, you should definitely include that in your notebook.
All right. So do you have any tips for winning the Think Award? It's really about trying to get everything in your notebook, and you want to try and keep your notebook clean and organized. When someone's looking at the Think Award is judged based solely on the notebook, so you should want to try and project your entire team and your desired image on the people. So really taking all of these separate aspects like the photos and having lots of those photos, and math, tons of math if you show all different types of math. So you're not just doing torque calculations, you're also doing math in the code. You're doing maybe you decided to use math to calculate your social media post. I don't know. Anytime you're using math, then you should be putting it in there. Anytime you're using anything, and make it a variety of things. So you have the math, you have the sketches, and you have your CAD, you have your photos, you have so many different aspects. So it's not just about having a lot written, it's about having a lot of different items in your notebook. So you want to have all those separate items, and you want to show everything about your team, and this is kind of like your sales pitch. This is helping to promote your team, but also just represent who you are. So yeah, I would say emphasize those math, photos, CAD, photos, math, everything.
If you scroll down, is that is the very bottom question answered, or
Different?
I can answer that one.
Okay, so the very last question, the most recent question, is how do you represent CAD in your notebook? Pictures, description, etc. This is a great question. So something that I did when writing the CAD section was have a lot of pictures, screenshots of whatever CAD CAD program you're using. Especially like as you design your parts really helps, as well as explaining what the part is for and how you're designing it. You may have this part in your design section as well. It's also nice to have it in a separate CAD section that just explains what your thought process was as you're designing this part in CAD.
So the very last question, the very bottom one is what different sections do you normally implement in your notebook? And again, this still really depends on how many you really want. You can have a lot, you can have very few. What just matters is you have every single section that is necessary to show a very big, broad picture of what your team is really about. So for example, you can have, and I have several notebooks here as well, so I have reference. You can have competitions, and then you can have a business plan and team bios, outreach, design, and code, and that can be it. Or you can have even more of that, even more sections. And then also subsections, like you can also have CAD sections, and then like it can branch off into sections about like certain parts or assemblies in CAD. And it all really depends on how much you're willing to write as well, because if you have a lot of sections that you need to write a lot about, it might be kind of harder for some teams than others. So it really depends. Basically, you just want to go for the big ones and then think about this ones that aren't as necessary later. So like generally just like design, outreach, code, maybe CAD, team, business plan, and that's like it. And then you can think about other things kind of later.
All right. So do you have people like your coaches or mentors review your notebooks? It's always great to have an extra set of eyes on the notebook. What you might do sometimes, you could set up like notebook reviews where you present to them, hey, this is what we're doing with the notebook. Do you have any feedback? Like I have in the past gone with maybe a page for the electronic notebook that I'm working on, and I'll say, what are your thoughts about if I did it this way? Do you think that's more interesting? And just showing different people, even if it's not your coaches or mentors, your teammates, you could just show like your parent and say, hey, do you think this looks cool? Because that just getting an outside perspective is always good, and having people review and provide feedback. That being said, if you're getting that amount of feedback, try and still make it a team decision. So there might be some pieces of input you get that you're like, well, I don't necessarily think that that's like what we're trying to do, but do take the feedback, and remember that it is feedback. And yeah.
Yeah, having a lot of feedback is very good. You can even have teams or other teams look at your notebook as well. I don't know how many teams are comfortable with that, but for example, we are very willing to look at anyone's notebooks and give them feedback if you want, or just more general tips about them. Like, I'm sure there are so many teams or other people who aren't even related to FTC who are willing to look at your notebook and give an honest review about it, because notebooks, again, you can use them in basically any scenario. If you're like for example, in like if you're just taking a lab class and you have like a and you just need to take simple notes, and that can relate kind of back to the engineer notebook. So you can have really anyone look at it and critique it in a way.
So one of the questions here is, what should you do if one person wants to do the notebook entirely by him or herself? Well, I guess first of all, I would say you're lucky that you have someone who's that excited doing the engineering notebook, but it's probably not the best idea to let them do all of it. First of all, that would be a huge undertaking, even if you only have one notebook from one person to be doing all of that. And also, if all they're doing is writing in the notebook, then when are they going to have time to actually see what you guys are doing with the robot? Because you shouldn't be writing about the robot if you don't know what the robot does. So that would not be the best idea. One idea might be, if someone's that excited about the notebooks, to have them be the person who's in charge of it, so they can be keeping on top of other people and making sure that they're getting the parts that they need to get done. But you really want everyone to be writing in the notebook and not just one person.
All right, Nathan, would you like to answer the next question?
So one of the questions on here, I can't see it on your screen, but I can see it on mine, is how long should a daily entry be? 1 pages or 2 pages? So for us, it's usually 1 page. However, if there's a specific topic that we think would take a lot more than 1 page, we usually expand that to 2. However, you do want to write at least 1 page. If you find yourself struggling to catch up, remember to add pictures or sketches of what you're designing. But again, if you have a lot to write, you should write 2 pages.
If you want to scroll down a bit so we can see some
We just answered those last 2. We've already.
Okay, well, we'll go down to whatever we haven't answered.
So we've got my team works separately. For example, build team programming, public relations. Should we have separate sections for specific details? Would you like to answer that question?
You can if you want to, since you just said it.
Okay. So yes, having sections is great. And if you have if your team divides into those sections, then you could easily separate it based on what you're working on. So having a programming section and the programmers cover writing that, and public relations and your outreach and stuff like that, that all could go in one section. And the build team. And even within there, you might want subsections. So like with the robot, you've got a robot, but it's going to have lots of different aspects. It might have like an intake and a deposit. It's going to have the drivetrain, so many different things. And so you might want to make those even subsections. It is recommended that you do have a daily log somewhere that documents those meetings. Just to cover another question, that log can range from 1 page to several pages depending on how much you did and how much you have to write about. So it really depends on what you need to document. But yeah, if you have that and alongside those sections, that will actually make your notebook really, really strong, because it's showing that you are not only writing in the moment that you're working on it, but you're also then going back and making these sections to look at.
So the next question is, what are the most important aspects to get awards? Well, so as most of you know, most of these awards you need a notebook for. The notebook is very important for these, specifically Inspire and Think, which is the Notebook Award. You want to have a very diverse notebook or notebooks that covers every single part of your journey throughout the entire season. So for certain awards, obviously you want to have more of each, and if you want to go for the bigger awards, you want to have a lot of each aspect and type of something. So for example, design, if you wanted to really, really want to get design, you'd obviously want to have a lot about your design process, a lot of CAD. So you want to actually CAD your basically your entire robot and have, sections of, here's the parts that we might maybe 3D printed, or here are the assemblies, and then the full robot and whatnot. And you want to carefully describe each mechanism and the robot as a whole and what the goals are for your robot. And obviously you want to have that in general, but you really want to, figure out what to write for that and make sure that you are definitely hitting every aspect of each award. So you also want to look at the award descriptions and what they're looking for each award, and then look at your notebook too and see if there's something lacking in one of the awards. So for example, like if you're going for control or something, and you look at the description and you realize, oh, my notebook doesn't have XYZ, then you definitely want to add that, obviously. And you want to really try to go for a notebook that has a personality as well. You don't want to just go for white pages, just blank kind of, whatever. You want to kind of make it look exciting to read as well, and that will definitely make your notebook stand out more than others.
All right, Celine, you're up.
So one of the questions here is, what do you think about referencing people in the notebook? Example, Bob mounted the motor versus the builders mounted the motor. So this is really just going to end up being personal preference in what your team decides, but I would suggest that as you're writing your daily logs, they should not look like Celine mounted screws today and Cece did 7 and Nathan applied all of the lock nuts. That's not exactly what the meeting logs are about. They're more about how your design may have progressed over the entire meeting, not like every single tiny little detail that you did during the meeting. So it's really up to you whether you want to name who did what or you want to put it in more general terms. I guess the one thing that might be not as great about naming specific people is if Bob's name shows up on every single page and kind of nobody else's does, because it's going to show that Bob was doing most of the work. But hopefully that wouldn't be happening in your team anyway.
So also I will add that we are running a little bit out of time. It's probably like 10 or 15 more minutes. So we'll just keep on answering questions, and afterwards we will have a documentation of all the questions and more answers of all of them. If your question didn't get answered, then we will have an answer there.
And just to piggyback off of that, we would love it if you could go onto the First Online website and just write a review of what you thought of the class, and any feedback for us and just for First Online in general. We're trying to make it as cohesive and easy for you guys as possible, so we really want to grow and improve, and we'd love your feedback as we're trying to do so. So if you could go on the First Online website and do that, that would be wonderful. Thank you. Okay.
So on to questions.
What?
Nothing. Don't worry about it.
Okay. Yeah. So back to questions. Let's see. Should the notebook include sponsors, and which section would that be included in? Sponsors? Yes, absolutely. These sponsors, you want to just, they are sponsoring you, and you would love, and I'm sure they would love some publicity from you. So whenever you have an opportunity to talk about your sponsors, always just talk about your sponsors. So like we are sponsored by GoBuilda, and they donate a very large quantity of our parts to us. And so we love to talk about them. And first of all, highly recommend Go Build Up. But also, yes, you want to you want to include those sponsors, and you want to just try and list them when you can. Talk about them. Maybe show your interaction. How did you get them to sponsor you, and how have you helped to promote them? And that could go into your, if you have an outreach section, that can go into that outreach section. That could even be a section of its own, just talking about your sponsors. Or if you're talking about funding and like how you work out the what your team spends on what, sponsors should go in there. And so sponsors can really fit in several different aspects, and you should try and mention them when you can, like I said. But if you want to fit them in a specific section, if you are including the budget, which is great to include in the notebook, then you might want to stick them there, or you could just stick them in the outreach section. I would cover a lot of interaction with them under outreach within the STEM community, because a lot of your sponsors will likely be STEM based or interested in STEM in any case.
I will piggyback off of you once again, and say if you want to highlight your sponsors a lot, which is a very good plan, I'd highly advise doing that. You can kind of write your sponsors in your business plan, for example. You can have like, we're sponsored by these teams, and these are how much they mean to us. And then in your outreach section, you can actually have more kind of detailing of what you do, not just what they do for you, but also what you do for them. So for example, maybe you had a sponsorship with Staples, and you decided that you wanted to have a demo at one of their stores, which is really cool, I'll admit. So you definitely want to have that in the outreach section, and you want to label them as one of the very good sponsors, obviously if they sponsor you. So that's very important, and it would be very cool to highlight things like that.
All right, Nathan.
Okay, I'll answer the question. What needs to be included in the programming section? Do you need pictures of code, descriptions, both something else, the process, or the product? Hold on, I just lost that. For that question, what you should do is you should include all of it. So you should include descriptions of the product, as well as the final code, and if possible, and if you have enough time, you should also include explanations of what certain parts of the code do. Like if you have a specific, I'm not that familiar with code, FTC code, but if you find a specific part that says that does a really important task, you should definitely point that out and explain how that works. It's also good idea to print out your final code and put that into the electronic notebook. If you can get it, it looks really nice. But make sure if you're going to do this, you do the color coding that you find in a lot of Cece, do you remember what they call the places where you do programming in? I can't remember. It's like
programming section, or
no,
like Android Studio, Java, Python.
What did they call those again? No, the Android Studio, the like NetBeans.
Your programming platform.
Yeah, I forget. There's a specific name for them. Sorry. The programming platform, if it has color-coded text in it, you should definitely try to do something along the lines of that, because it makes the code much easier to read. If you have like this long data dump of just a bunch of black text that you can't differentiate, rather than some nice color-coded text, it looks way better.
All right, so we're going to answer one more question. I'm going to ask so that Celine answers that. But if your question was not answered, we will be answering all of the questions in a document and sharing that with you guys, so that you can see those answers and get these answers. We'll try and answer all of the questions that we've received today. So yeah, we'll just keep track of that, and you will be able to access that and get the answers to your questions, even if they aren't said now. So Celine, would you like to take the last question for us?
Sure, I'll take the one, what do you include in bios? So the bios section is where each team member gets to write a little bit about themselves. So an example might be something like, hi, my name is Celine, and this is my second year on an FTC team. I decided to continue with FTC because I love the way that it blends soft skills like interviewing with learning STEM skills as well. This season, I would really enjoy learning more about the programming side as well as about how to come up with different design ideas. Besides participating in FTC, I love to read books, and I'm a competitive Irish dancer or whatever it may be. It could be 3 lines, or if you like to write, it could be like a kind of sort of a long paragraph, but it just is an introduction to yourself and then also obviously to your other team members. You can also have a bio for your robot. I believe we actually had one this year. We called it Like Hosted I because our robot has a cool name. You're welcome.
Because cheesiness.
Spiders. It's a spider name. It's cool. There's a long story behind it, but
we're not going to explain that right now. But also, I would like to add that your bios can be very different from just like plain old, this is my blank year, I like robotics, I like cheese. And you don't have to do that. You can do many different things that are creative to you. Like, I've seen a lot of different bios and I like all of them, but one of my favorite things is to also get a laugh out of some of the bios that I read. So for example, I've seen some teams with, like a joke or something, or like something like a superpower that they have, like a joke superpower or something like that. And that's really funny. I like to laugh when I read things like that because it kind of shows kind of a personality, and that's what you're really supposed to be teaching when you're making a bio. So that's what I advise, is try to make it at least slightly less like you're trying to read a giant, page full of text.
Also, photos. That's a place you could include photos because photos are great. Yeah, I'd like to emphasize photos, math, CAD, and more math and more photos and more CAD and all of that. Drawings too. Drawings are cool. Okay, so I think that is all we have time for. And if you do want a team to review your notebook, you can feel free to email us at any point. We're always available and willing to look at whether you want us to just look at like one section and maybe provide you feedback on one idea you have or anything. And we do keep it confidential because we're not going to go around sharing other people's notebooks without their permission. But anyways, we will review your notebook. We can answer more questions if you have them. Contact us via email, Facebook, Instagram. We can share those for you.
I put the email in the chat. I'm about to send Instagram and whatever on there so you guys can reach out to us.
That was a private message.
Oh, whoops.
There's the email to everyone. Okay.
All right. Well, go ahead. You can do that.
Okay. Yeah. So just feel free to reach out to us at any point. And also, we do ask again that you do leave us a review. That'd be super helpful. I think that's about it. We will get back to you with the answers to the remaining questions when we get the chance. It should be within the next day. Yeah, thank you for tuning in. And
yep, thanks so much.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, have a nice day.
Have a nice quarantine.